So, as Tracy hinted, I'm going to need a few volunteers this morning. I'm going to need 3, and I'm going to need each of you to come up one by one, just briefly on stage with me. So, for a first volunteer, do we have someone who's maybe feeling a little hungry and who likes eating fruit? Come on, don't be scared, Honestly, it'll be fun. Are you able to come up? Is that okay? Oh, we got 2, we? Okay. Well, I've got a special treat that I've prepared for you. Have a look at that and tell me what you think. My delicious fruit salad.
I think it's a bit past its sell-by
A bit
date.
past its sell-by date. How rude! I've got a lovely little clementine, a lovely peach. I think there's a maggot actually might have crawled into that peach. And extra protein. And what about the raspberries? What do you think of them?
No, I don't think I could eat.
No, you don't want my delicious fruit salad?
No.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you for coming up anyway. I appreciate that, and I won't make you eat it. Okay. Now you can stay here. Oh no, you're running away. Have I lost a volunteer? Are you going to come up? Now then, let's see what we've got here. What have I prepared for you? What do you think of that? Does that look tasty? Tell us what you see.
It looks like fish.
It looks like fish. Give it a smell. How does it smell? Not so good. Not so good.
Like so.
Yeah? So, yeah. Would you like to try it?
No.
Okay, a round of applause for volunteer number 2. No. It's actually anchovies. Anchovies, those little fish. You get the heads and the tails and everything, and they're really fishy and really strong, and it's really not a tasty thing to eat on a Sunday morning. Now I need one more volunteer. Oh, yeah, you coming up? Yep, yeah. Come on up. Now then, I think this is delicious. What do you think? What?
So bananas and beans.
Bananas and baked beans, yeah? Do you not like bananas?
I don't mind them, but together.
Oh, I see. You don't like them together? No, so you're not going to eat my okay. Okay. Well, round of applause. I love the expression on your face when I uncovered that. It was like oh. And that's the funny thing about disgust, isn't it? You can really see disgust in someone's face. Let's all make our most disgusted faces and make our most disgusted noise. Okay. Well, we've had 3 volunteers. All of them thought my food was disgusting. I'm really quite offended after all of the effort that I've got into. All I can suggest is maybe I'll bring bigger portions of this to the bring and share next week. Shall I do that? So today we're looking at disgust. And the thing about the disgust is the science behind disgust. I find this really interesting because the experts tell us that there are different types of disgust. So first of all, there's core disgust, and there's a picture not dissimilar to that lovely fruit that I offered you earlier. And psychologists believe that this emotion, this kind of disgust, is a natural response that's designed to help us reject things that would be toxic to us. So this kind of disgust, core disgust, it plays an important role in keeping our bodies safe. And then there's social disgust. You see, where's our second volunteer gone? Run to the toilet to be sick. Well, you didn't like those anchovies because it was something, probably that you wouldn't normally eat, and you see the whole fish and its head. That kind of disgust is pretty normal, because every culture, every person only ever eats like a small subset of all the foods that are in the world. And many of us find unfamiliar foods disgusting. We're distrustful of them. And so, for example, the picture on the slide, well, the French love eating snails, escargot, but I'm sure many of us in this hall would find that idea pretty disgusting. And then there's another type of disgust, moral disgust. So volunteer number 3 really made her face when I presented them with my delicious banana and baked bean casserole. And as you said, perhaps not because those things are disgusting in themselves, but just the idea of eating them together, well, you just thought that's plain wrong, right? That's just not right. Well, I don't know about you. There's just one food that I really, really can't put in my mouth, and that happens to be mushrooms. And I don't know what it is. It's the slimy texture. It's the taste. It's the fact that I know they're a fungus. And to me, that just seems wrong to eat. Does anyone else not like mushrooms? No, a few of you. What kind of foods do people here find just downright disgusting? Tell us. Semolina. Yeah, a lot of people just don't. I think it's the texture, maybe. Yeah. Offal. Yeah. Bits of animals that you're not quite sure what they are, what they're doing there. Yeah. What else? Octopus and squid. Oh, see, I love octopus and squid, but I can understand that those tentacles on a plate aren't appealing to everyone. Well, of course, the emotion of disgust, it runs much deeper than just food. That's just an example this morning. And in fact, I think what makes disgust so fascinating as an emotion is just how far-reaching in our lives it can be. I think that all emotions are given to us by God. And if you're here this morning and you don't believe in God, that's okay, because I'm sure you would at least agree that they were kind of born with some of these emotions. We're given them by nature. So is it wrong to feel and to express disgust? Well, no, not necessarily. As we saw, core disgust helps us to discern and reject what's harmful to us, like the rotting fruit. And again, it's not just fruit, it's other things like dirt or germs and disease. Disgust helps us keep ourselves safe from those things. But with all our emotions, it's the same with disgust. If we let it get out of control, it can harm us and it can harm those around us. And you see, when we get to the social disgust, and this moral disgust, the things that we're not familiar with and we want to avoid, or the things that we just think are wrong, well, in particular with those things start to get a bit blurry, don't they? Because the problem, as we've already seen, is that everyone has their own list of things they find downright disgusting. It's subjective. And sometimes our brains get a bit confused, and that encourages these emotions to just go off the rails. But the real problem starts, I think, when we start to express our social and our moral disgust, not at things and not at behaviors, but actually at people themselves. And that can lead us to judging others or belittling them. It can lead to contempt, or even bullying and exclusion, and perhaps even hatred. Well, in the Bible, the Pharisees were a group of people who did a really good job at being disgusted at other people. And the Pharisees were a sect of Jews. They were a group of Jews, and they were pious, God-fearing people. And they wanted to ensure that God's people kept his laws and that they never again departed from his ways. So you see, originally their motives were good. But by Jesus' time, well, they'd become a rather unpleasant bunch, and they looked down their nose at other people, and they expressed their disgust at them. And in fact, Jesus reserved some of his harshest words for these people. So let's take a look at one example in our reading today. We're looking at the Gospel of Luke, chapter 18, and it's the parable of the Pharisee and the tax collector. Let's read it, and I'll read it out for you. So reading from verse 9, to some who were confident of their own righteousness and looked down on everyone else, Jesus told this parable. So who are these people Jesus was telling the parable to? Well, it's the Pharisees, of course. And I rather like the King James translation here. It says, the version we put up there, the NIV says, look down on others. The King James version says they despised others. They were disgusted by them. And then we see these two men going up to the temple. And the first one is a Pharisee. So, of course, he's going up to the temple to pray. That's what Pharisees did. But the other is a tax collector. And in those days, the tax collector being in the temple, well, that would have raised some eyebrows. You see, tax collectors were hated. They were traitors to Israel because they collected taxes from their own countrymen and then sent it on to the Roman occupiers. And even worse, they weren't just collecting tax, they were adding however much money they wanted themselves on top, money that they would then take home and put in their pocket. So these guys were extortionists. And many of them added a lot of money and became very rich. And they used that to live lives of excess and luxury and sin. So when Jesus tells this story, it was shocking for those people that were listening. And I don't know, a contemporary parallel, what might that look like? Well, it could be something like this. Two people come into North End Baptist Church to pray. One is a faithful deacon who's been serving for many years. The other is a local gang leader, a drug dealer who carries a knife. That's the kind of shocking message in this parable. Let's read on. So the Pharisee stood by himself and prayed, God, I thank you that I am not like other people, robbers, evildoers, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week, and I give 1/10 of all I get. Whoa. So someone loves themselves, don't they? Look at that attitude. Smug, self-satisfied, superior. I rather like how Darragh translates this in his version of the Bible. The Pharisee standing prayed thus to himself. You see, he gives a quick nod in God's direction, doesn't he? But that's the last that we hear of God, because he's basically just bragging about himself to himself. He's full of this social and moral disgust, isn't he, as he compares himself to others. He thinks he's better than them. And we can imagine him sneering over at the tax collector. I'm especially glad I'm not like him. But the tax collector stood at a distance. He would not even look up to heaven, but beat his breast and said, God, have mercy on me, a sinner. So this man stands away, far away from the religious people. He can't even bring himself to look up to heaven, which was the standard posture for praying in the temple. And look, compared to the Pharisees' ramble, well, what a short prayer this is, about 8 words. But it's heartfelt. And what is in his heart really comes out. And he beats his chest and he begs for God's mercy. You see, he owns his sin and his wrongdoing. And he knows he can't do anything himself to atone for that sin and make him right with God. He knows only God can help him. And what does Jesus say, the last verse of this parable? Well, I tell you that this man, that is the tax collector, rather than the other, that's the Pharisee, went home justified before God. For all those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. Now, these words, well, they would have been the opposite to what people expected to hear in that day. You know, perhaps this story is a bit familiar to some of us here, and as soon as we hear the word Pharisee, well, we know who the bad guy is going to be in the story. But back then, the Pharisee, well, he would have been seen as the good guy, the pillar of the community, the best churchgoer, the clean living person, the kind of person you'd want to have as your neighbor. But Jesus says, well, I tell you, it's the tax collector rather than the Pharisee who went home justified. So, two very different people, two very different prayers, and two very different outcomes. One man thinks he's living the perfect life, but he leaves the temple as far away from God as he can be. And the other, the crook, leaves at peace with God because he owns his sin and he asks for mercy. So, where do the Pharisees go so wrong? Well, I've picked out a few examples from Jesus' words here and elsewhere in the Gospels. So, number one, they thought too highly of themselves. You know, throughout the Gospels, the Pharisees criticized Jesus for being and eating and hanging out with sinners because they thought they were better. What about us? Do we think highly of ourselves? Well, I suspect most of us would say, no, of course not. Of course I don't think I'm better than anyone else. But we need to be careful because this disgust can come out in lots of insidious, sneaky ways. And it's very easy for us to start looking down on other people, well, because they think differently or they behave differently. You know, perhaps our neighbors from foreign cultures who have habits that are different to our own, or maybe people with different political views to us. Maybe people who we judge to be lazy or stupid, or maybe people who just do things, that we just don't approve of. Well, third, they were hypocrites. You see, these Pharisees were more concerned about being seen to be good on the outside than actually being good on the inside. They ignored all of their own failings and highlighted the failures of others. Well, let's get something straight here, because I'm not, and you're not, better than the person who sins differently to you. You know, we meet people with different struggles, different backgrounds, different challenges to our own. And yet, too often, instead of love, we dish out judgment. And we think, like the Pharisees, even if we don't say it out loud, even if we don't pray it, well, I'm not as bad as them. Number 4, the Pharisees made up their own rules. You see, they added bits to God's laws. And, you know, sometimes again, I think we can be just a little bit like this. We create this culture sometimes, don't we, where, well, some sins are more acceptable, they're not that bad, and others, well, we make those other sins to be worse than they are. Why? Well, because it suits us, doesn't it? You know, we might not bat an eye at gossip or pride or greed, but someone struggling with a sin that we don't understand or we just don't like, and we treat them like they are beneath us. So what does all of this add up to? Well, number 5, the Pharisees had lost sight of the big picture. They became obsessed by the tiny details, and they forgot the big things that God really cares about. And that verse at the bottom, Jesus highlights some of these things like justice, mercy, and faithfulness. Now, you know, whatever our personal faith, whether you have no faith at all or whether you have lots of faith, we all face a tension in our lives, don't we? We want to try and be kind and loving to others while not wanting to condone the disgusting things that other people, sometimes we hear them say or we see them do But I think it's really interesting that Jesus chose a Pharisee, a religious person, to feature in this parable. And I think he did that deliberately, and I think it speaks to us today. If you're here this morning and you don't call yourself a Christian, maybe what I'm going to say next won't surprise you. In fact, maybe it's the whole reason why you don't buy into this Christianity thing. But if you are a Christian, well, listen up, because I think we need to hear this. Did you know that one of the leading reasons, usually the leading reasons why people say they aren't attracted to Christianity, well, those have nothing to do with Jesus. No, they often have to do with us, with Christians. And I saw a big research study that was carried out about 3 years ago, and I was shocked to see that the majority, more than half of people who regarded themselves as non-religious people, so the majority of non-religious people said they consider Christians to be self-righteous, hypocritical, and judgmental. Now, I don't know about you, but that sounds like a little bit of a problem to me. And it reminds me of this quote from Gandhi. Now, Gandhi, I was reading, he engaged in serious study over a long time of many religions, and before he chose the one that he thought suited him best. But here's what he had to say about Christianity. I like your Christ. I do not like your Christians. Your Christians are so unlike your Christ. Oh dear. You see, there is a place for disgust, and there's even a place for moral disgust. But we need to be so careful of how we control and how we express it towards others. And we can't afford to get this wrong, because every person that we meet in life, well, they're a precious creature made by God. And every time we make someone feel like we're disgusted with them, well, that can drive them even further from God. So, to recap quickly, we've learned that disgust is an emotion that's given to us by God, or by nature, if you must. And we've seen that at its core, disgust can play an important role in keeping us safe. But if we let it get out of control, it can harm us, and it can harm those around us. And we need to be particularly careful about expressing our social and moral disgust towards other people. And as we've seen, that disgust doesn't always come out in an expression of recoiling in horror for someone. It can just as easily mean looking down on someone, judging them, and thinking like the Pharisee that we're better than them. So how do we manage this? Well, I think the first thing we can do is examine ourselves. What are the things in my life, like the Pharisee, that I just conveniently ignore and gloss over while I'm so busy judging others? Are there things that I do, things that I think, things that I've got involved in that I shouldn't, and really I should be disgusted in those things and should stop doing those before I judge others? And what is it? What is it that actually causes me to be quick to judge others sometimes? Is it social conditioning, the way we've been brought up in our families and communities? Could even be religious conditioning. We've picked up negative behaviors, negative thinking from other Christians that are really closer to the thinking of the Pharisees rather than the teachings of Jesus. Or is it something to do with our own vulnerabilities? If we are insecure in ourselves, for example, we might be more likely to compare ourselves with others and look down on other people. Or if we're prone to jealousy, well, we might be more likely to resent others and then try and belittle them. There can be many reasons why we let our disgust get out of control. And I know it can be painful to examine ourselves and admit what our vulnerabilities are. But doing so, I think, helps us to be more self-aware. It helps us to learn what our triggers are and what sets our emotions off. And it means we know what to look out for when this disgust surfaces. And then secondly, in the moment, challenge our emotions when they surface. We can't stop ourselves from feeling emotions. And we shouldn't blame ourselves for feeling emotions. But how we respond to those is up to us. So the next time that you feel disgust rising inside you, maybe try this. Take a step back, challenge it, and ask yourself, why am I reacting in this way? Is it one of those triggers, one of those vulnerabilities, one of those weaknesses, one of those things about your background? And then ask why that person that you're finding disgusting, why are they talking or behaving in that way? And consider their struggles. Think about what their backstory is. Because the closer that I get to knowing them and understanding them, well, then the less likely I am to find them disgusting. And finally, I think we should strive to see the bigger picture. So when I find myself looking down on someone, make a conscious decision instead to look up to God and to look to the things that really matter. At the end of the day, the most important law for any Christian, in fact, some people would say the only law, is the law of love. And that's what should guide our response. And it's important that we get this right, because if you remember back to the last verse of that parable, if you're a Christian, Jesus gives us a warning and a promise. As we read, he says that everyone who exalts themselves will be humbled, but whoever humbles themselves will be exalted. Now, I don't pretend to know exactly what that means, but I sense that it has an eternal dimension to it. And I'm quite certain that being on the wrong end of that equation is not somewhere we want to be. But the great news, the wonderful news, is that being on the right side means that God surely will have a reward for us.